Rocco Becht is being wildly disrespected in these offseason quarterback rankings lists. So today, I am breaking down why Rocco Becht deserves to be ranked significantly higher on Locked On Cyclones.
You are Locked On Cyclones, your daily podcast on the Iowa State Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Shout out to you for being here every single day, making this your first watch or listen of the day. I appreciate it more than you know, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on your favorite podcasting platform. Be sure to hit subscribe so we can prove once and for all that it is, in fact, a Cyclone state. On today's episode, it's a very special crossover with Locked On Kansas State. We're going to talk about both Rocco Becht and Avery Johnson, how they're being a little bit potentially underrated, at least Rocco Becht is for sure, and why that might not be the case. Both Christian Rao and I will break that down. Then we'll talk a little bit about some Big 12 power rankings. We'll talk a little bit about the 16-team playoff, all that, and more. Can't wait to dive into all that. But first, this episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money and use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Without further ado, let's dive into it.
All right, welcome on into this Locked On crossover, Locked On Iowa State, Locked On Cyclones, and Locked On Kansas State. Christian Rao here with Nick Maravitz. Let's break this down and let's talk. And you already heard my intro if you're listening on Locked On Kansas State. I'm sure it's the same thing for Nick as well. But there's a little bit of disrespect when it comes to the Big 12 quarterback race. And at least I feel so on the side of Kansas State, Nick. I think there's not enough love for Avery Johnson. I have a feeling you also feel the same way. I don't know if I feel that way, but I want to hear your thoughts. And I think this is a nice little kind of time to have a battle where we're less than 100 days away from Dublin, Ireland. Maybe we can make it a little friendly for now, get a little bit more tough when the time gets closer. So I'm going to give you the dice. I'm going to let you go first, maybe be the gentleman here and say, because you guys won Farmageddon last year, you can go first. And here's what I want to say here. Rocco Becht, when I look at some of these Twitter trolls or whatever you want to call it, you get all these different people across Twitter X talk about their Big 12 quarterback power rankings. Here's one of them, CF Budge. That's one I see all the time on there. Number 1, Sam Levitt from Arizona State. Sawyer Robertson, number 2. And then you get Rocco Becht at 3 and Avery Johnson 4. That's actually a pretty decent one. Now, I would argue that I'd argue that, well, hold your horses there. Avery Johnson's 4. I don't know if you should say that. I would argue that that's okay, decent. But then you have some other ones here, right? Where you have Rocco Becht at 2 and then Avery Johnson still at 4. Okay. And then here's one that's just completely out to left field, in my opinion. The Pete Sosa show. That's an interesting one. Sawyer Robinson at 1, Sam Levitt at 2, Josh Hoover at 3 for TCU, Caden Salter, a guy who's not even played in the Big 12 yet, from Colorado, goes 4, and then Rocco at 5. Avery Johnson, nowhere to be seen. Big ouch on this one. So what I'm trying to say here is I'm going to throw it your way. Rocco Becht, he appears on all of these lists I just talked about here, but why is he a quarterback that should be seen as a top quarterback in the Big 12, either 1, 2, or 3, that nowhere else on this list? Why is Rocco a player that should be always right there?
Well, I appreciate you giving me the honors there, obviously, as the reigning Farmageddon champions. Yes, of course. I will say, the first list you kind of mentioned, it was Levitt at 1. The Sawyer Robertson, okay, we can do that. It's whatever. Rocco at 3. I don't hate it. Avery Johnson at 4. Like, that's a problem. That's not a list that I would look at and say, okay, there's something very, very wrong here. Now, some of the ones you said later, that's kind of where we're getting into the weeds there. But as far as Rocco goes, there are a lot of differing opinions on Rocco. He didn't make the top 100 that On3 put out as far as players coming into this year, and I was very shocked to see that. I think a lot of the apprehension comes because of the loss of Higgins and Noel, right? You're losing, 2,200 yards of offensive production. But I don't think that that's a big deal because I've got really 3 big reasons here. For one, we aren't accounting for Rocco's legs. Rocco on the ground last year was unreal, either in picking up yards early in the down set and 1-2, or later in third down situations where he was able to actually get that new set of downs. Second reason, clutch factor is it's you can't really quantify it, but it felt like Rocco had that last year. Just a handful of single score wins for the Cyclones, and Rocco kind of at the helm of a lot of those. And then finally, when you look at the offensive production coming into this year for the Cyclones, we have a influx like crazy of tight ends just due to injury. And then Chase Sowell and Xavier Townsend transfer wide receivers that I do think will be very, very solid. A little side piece that I've thrown in consistently is that Xavier Townsend and Rocco, friends from, I believe it was high school. And so that chemistry is going to play a role, in my opinion. And then you look at the running back position, because really it's wide receivers, tight ends, and running backs that are catching the ball for 99% of the time. There was a name, River Peppers, thrown out by Matt Campbell as an exemplary, as an exemplary kind of receiving back on top of the added experience of Abu Sama and Carson Hansen. So I think across the board, we're poised to have yet another very solid receiving group, even if it isn't, which we don't know if it is or not, just the wide receivers. I think every position is going to be able to come through for Rocco, and I don't see any problems with that side of the why are we holding up because he's missing players.
You know, you and I are going to have a longer conversation about Iowa State in the next coming days, where we start the whole summer school process, digging into Big 12 teams. So I don't want to go too deep on that. But when we talk about Rocco Becht and we talk about what he did last year, I mean, let's not forget that you guys were in the Big 12 championship game last year. I mean, that was a game that Rocco helped you get there. There's no doubt about it. And then you look at the past of Iowa State. We're talking about Brock Purdy, a guy who just got a contract extension in the NFL. He's finally not getting paid at the minimum wage level. He's not bus driver pay anymore. He's finally getting NFL-like pay quarterback. Now, say what you wish about if you think it's an overpay or not, whatever the case may be. I disagree. I think you did what you need to do to get paid. You did what, exactly. You did what you had to do. Team friendly. I love that. And then you have Hunter Dekkers, who, I mean, dare I say, could he be a potential Saints quarterback at one time? Could happen. You never know, right? It's a gamble. It's a gamble. I'll say that. I'm not afraid. But all that being said, there is, and I think I can make the same argument with Kansas State, and I probably will in the next segment. There is a history of good quarterbacks with NFL potential at Iowa State. Are we looking at another one right here with Rocco Becht?
Absolutely. I don't know if Rocco will go to the NFL after this year or if he'll wait another year. But I think there is a real argument that in 2-3 years, there will be 3 starting quarterbacks in the NFL from Iowa State. Now, that is kind of gambling, if you will, on Hunter Dekkers getting the starting position. But when you look at who's in the Saints building, which I kind of broke down earlier last week, it's Tyler Shuck, obviously going to get kind of the nod as that second round pick. But then who else, right? It was Spencer Rattler, and I can't remember the guy's name, but I remember the pictures he took. Those 2 guys, I don't know if they're necessarily severe competition to Dekkers. Therefore, there's a real shot that Dekkers could play in the NFL and at the same time as Rocco and Brock Purdy. And I say that because Dekkers is the one that I am not so sure on. I think Rocco is absolutely the NFL type of quarterback that I guess NFL teams are looking for, right? He's got the ability to extend plays on the ground. We've seen him throw deep balls exceptionally well, especially to Higgins last year. And his accuracy overall is relatively solid. And that was only when he was, sophomore or whatever it was last year. Like he's got time to develop this year and potentially even next year if this year doesn't go perfectly. So there is obviously a history of Iowa State in the NFL, a history of Iowa State quarterbacks in the NFL, and there is a future in Rocco Becht. I am very confident in saying that. I have no doubts that he will be on a team somewhere and probably starting within 2 years.
All right, nice little teaser to what we have coming in the next few days on the offensive side, especially at Rocco Becht for Iowa State. If there is one thing that will slow him down this year to not make him a top 1, 2, or 3 quarterback in the Big 12, what will it be?
Injuries. I think if there are no injuries, Iowa State is, and I know that's a little bit of a cop-out answer, but I have been extremely high on this team. I've spoken with many people, and it seems like there is kind of this consensus of like, well, I don't know what this team could be, and I just don't see it. I legitimately do not see it. So when you ask me that question, it comes down to, does what happened last year happen again, where this team is just bottom of the barrel, if you will, going into the last few weeks of the season. If we can avoid that, which I know it's football and it's going to be tough to do, if we can avoid that, I have full confidence in Rocco as far as one player goes.
All right, head to the dugout. When you come back, it's my turn to bat. I'll let you throw a couple pitches at me, and I'm going to tell you exactly why Avery Johnson deserves to be the top quarterback in the Big 12. This is a special Locked On College crossover with Locked On Kansas State and Locked On Cyclones. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Well, between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it is easy to lose track. Well, that's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. No, it is a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in just one place. So you stop managing your money and start building wealth. When I first started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save more. So thank you, Monarch, for that. So take control of your finances just like I did with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first order. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year.
Welcome back into this special edition of a Locked On Kansas State, Locked On Cyclones crossover. I'm Nick Marvitz, obviously, and joining me today is Christian Rao, where we're breaking down Rocco Becht and Avery Johnson, two quarterbacks that are potentially getting overlooked coming into this season. We broke down Rocco in the first segment, but now Avery Johnson. Christian Rao, what is Avery Johnson kind of special? Like, what about his game sets him apart and is what everyone is looking over in this kind of off-season period?
Have you ever watched Radio? You ever watched the movie Radio where, the great football
watch the
movie?
Radio?
Yeah. Have you ever watched? No, watch Radio, the movie Radio, the football movie with,
Great
when
movie.
he's sitting at the diner and the person comes to him and says, "You want apple or cherry pie?" And she looks at him and says, "Both." That's Avery Johnson, and both. He's a dual threat quarterback. Everything about him is fantastic. El Dorado, what a great cartoon movie. Why not both, right? He is a dual threat quarterback. He is absolutely electric. When you say what is best about him, everything. And you want to talk about cop-outs like you had in the first segment. You're talking about what was the thing that was going to go wrong with Rocco Becht. That's my biggest cop-out. Everything is great with Avery Johnson. Now, you can talk about his potential badness, and that's what I'm going to say. I'm going to use wrong words for this, badness, when it comes to his arm strength, because I think it's false, just like that word, just like the Webster's Dictionary that I apparently don't use. Now, what I want to say is this. There was a lot of things that went south at the second half of the season for Kansas State last year. I feel like that's not going to happen this year, because one of the biggest issues on the offensive side for Kansas State last year was the lack of wide receiver support. Didn't really have that dude other than Jace Brown. Jace Brown is returning, and they're also bringing back a heck of a lot of dudes. You talk about how you're losing some really tough wide receivers, which are going to be great. And by the way, Houston Texans or Houston Cyclones, what's going on over there? Are you going to get a jersey? And if you get a jersey, do you get Noel or do you get Higgins? And that's a tough one. Now you got to buy two jerseys. That's tough if you're an Iowa State fan. But I will say this. There's so many different wide receivers that are coming to Kansas State this year that I'm excited about. They brought size, and they're going to give Avery Johnson that next step. And that's why I really wanted to bring this conversation up today. When I see these different Big 12 power rankings, and the best they have is Avery Johnson at 4. They're not accounting for what they're bringing in. Everybody's downfall to Avery Johnson is saying his arm strength's not there. If you look at how many interceptions he threw last year, if you look at his total yards, they're only like 4 more or 4 less than Sawyer Robertson or whatever the heck it was. I don't know. But then you also have to look at what he had. Now, he has a great tight end room, and that's always something that Kansas State has every single year. That's something that they might be the tight end U of the Midwest. That just might be a thing. And I've gone out and made the argument that Kansas State is running back U of the Big 12. I've said that for quite some time with DJ Giddens, now Dylan Edwards coming in. We can have a whole kind of conversation on that, which we will when we break in Kansas State during our summer school series. But Avery Johnson has all these weapons. He didn't really have a wide receiver core last year, still found a way to start the year 7-1, Nick. Still found a way to start the year 7-1. He went to the Rate Bowl game against Rutgers, not the final that we were looking for, not the Pop-Tart Bowl, that we won before you did, for the record. And he had an amazing comeback victory. Now he gets to do that with a solidified offensive coordinator, Matt Wells, who now he has a known factor. He's not worrying about having co-offense coordinators. He has one guy to focus on. He has some great running backs. He still has a fantastic tight end room, which might be even better this next season. And now this wide receiver room, although could technically be seen as unproven because you haven't seen it on the field yet, brings a lot of size, something that Kansas State hasn't done for some time. And if you're worried about a little bit of accuracy issues, if you're worried about a little bit of interceptions, well, size usually cures that issue quite a bit.
Size cures all. Well, that's what they say, about the size deal there. I will say this. I was looking at the Big 12 rankings from last year. And yes, it was easy to find Iowa State right at the top there. I know, obviously, Arizona State topped us in the Big 12 championship, but let's move past it and move down the list a little bit. Kansas State, a little bit down the list there. I know you talked about Kansas State's start to the season, but not a great final record. What did Avery Johnson learn from that? What can he take moving forward into this team to try to kind of avoid a fall off at the end of the year and try to push Kansas State into the conversation for that Big 12 championship title? Because I know that all the Wildcat fans out there are hoping to bring home the hardware. I mean, how could you not, right?
Right. And that's a good point. I mean, your first year at the starting quarterback in the Big 12 in a school as prestigious as Kansas State, and you run into some issues after having a 7-1 start, as I mentioned. And, you're not a freshman, but you're really acting like a true freshman out there because you're trying to learn the system, and you had to get some grit. You had to learn some tough decisions and some tough issues while you're going, like in full time. So I think that's what you learn. I also think he wasn't 100% healthy towards the end of the season. I think that had a lot to do with it. You didn't see him get to be more of a dual threat quarterback as much as you like to. But whatever the case may be, I think he did learn from it. I think that not only him, but a lot of the returning offensive starters like Dylan Edwards, like Jace Brown, some of the offensive linemen, and some of the tight end room is going to play with a chip on their shoulder heading into the new year. I mean, I wouldn't want to be Iowa State after Kansas State losing in Farmageddon, after having a tough start and then bringing a lot of players back in the portal, which we'll talk about in the coming days. I mean, Iowa State, to me, I feel like they get to think about it all off season long. Now, flip side, Iowa State just lost the Big 12 championship. They're probably thinking the same way, but maybe not the same way that Kansas State's thinking about Iowa State, right? Avery Johnson, to me, I think has learned how to be a leader. And I think we hear that a lot from Coach Kleiman over the last couple weeks during spring ball, although spring ball was really short. But the reason spring ball was short was this strength and conditioning, and he joined the 24-mile-an-hour club. We're talking about a guy who has absolute speed now. He's an absolute unit, and now he's going to lead the team. So I'm really excited to see what Avery Johnson can prove this year. I think he's going to shut up a lot of doubters. And when we're talking about, I'm bookmarking all these Big 12 quarterback rankings, by the way, seeing where they all are at. I mean, if you have him anywhere lower than fourth, like as you mentioned, the first one we talked about earlier in the show, you can understand the argument why you have Sam Levitt at 1. Yes, he made it to the college football playoffs. Sawyer Robertson with Baylor. I think Baylor's going to be a heck of a team next year. And then I think Rocco and Avery, I think you could flip-flop them either way. Now, I would personally put Avery above Rocco. I think you'd be the other way around. But I think that's an okay type of order. I can't really argue that right now in the middle of May. But when we get to August, when we get to September, I can guarantee you that Avery Johnson will be in the top 2, and it won't be 2.
See, now that's the thing, is everyone's kind of rating based on last year at this point.
Right.
And I've seen it as well. It's a little frustrating, especially with the boat that Iowa State's in, and I can see the same kind of angle for Kansas State there, but I'm kind of curious, right? What hypothetically speaking, let's not even put this out in the universe, but hypothetically speaking, if Avery Johnson were to be kind of at that 5 or 6, even down a little bit from what he is now, why would that be? What potential issues did you see from last year that could carry over at least early in the season that he might have to correct towards the back end?
Yeah, if he doesn't step up to the way that I think he is going to, it's 2 things in my mind. It's one, that some of these turnovers, issues, and concerns that people are continuing to talk about and think it's a big deal actually is a big deal. which I'm overseeing, which I don't think is necessarily the case. I think it was a first year kind of starter feeling, getting the idea of an offense that wasn't really his offense. And quite frankly, it wasn't really anyone's. He was battling between two offensive coordinators, battling back and forth about who was going to be play calling between Matt Wells and Connor Riley. Connor Riley off to the Dallas Cowboys to be the offensive line coach now. Matt Wells has some really good past experience with quarterbacks. He was the head coach at Utah State when Jordan Love was there. Chris Kleiman's done some really good things with quarterbacks in the past. I mean, look at Will Howard, where he's at right now. You look at Skylar Thompson, where he is at right now. Actually, both of them are on the Pittsburgh Steelers, which is actually pretty funny. There's a lot of past experience, we mentioned to Iowa State, that Kansas State has as well. There's a pedigree with this coaching staff that does really well with quarterbacks. So if anything goes wrong with Avery Johnson that doesn't involve injuries, I won't go that route like you did in the first segment. If anything goes wrong with that, it's because either the turnovers, the issues were more of a bigger problem, or that wide receiver core that we just built up in the portal is not as great as we expected. The size actually didn't matter, which is something that you normally don't hear these days, Nick.
Oh, that's too much. That's too much, brother. I can't wait to dive into more with our, what were you calling it? This, the college, what did we, this
summer school, baby.
School?
Yeah, I got to get
summer school.
Little Big 12 summer school.
Little Big 12 summer school. I'm excited to dive into the Big 12 summer school, Iowa State, Kansas State edition. But first, we got to talk about the 16-team playoff to round out today's episode. We're going to do that coming up right after this.
Welcome back to a special Locked On College crossover, Locked On Kansas State, Locked On Cyclones. If you haven't already, click that subscribe button wherever you're listening, because we are absolutely growing these channels. If you're a Big 12 fan, all that good stuff, you want to make sure you're tuned in, because we are bringing you content every single day like no one else. And we're diving into this conversation where we had Avery Johnson or Rocco Becht. I think we got a nice little preliminary out there, like how we're feeling. I think that was the nicest way you and I could probably talk about each quarterback. That'll probably be the last time we do that. But it was nice, in the middle of May when we're kind of away from it. Dust has settled from last year. We're not really in gauntlet mode yet. It was a good moment to finally do that. Now let's talk about some weird things, because first of all, we've heard about this new format of 16-team playoff that eventually and most likely is going to happen in the future. And then I want to round up when we end this show. I've saw a couple people from On3 like Andy Staples, and I've seen some others like from Fox Sports, Joe Klatt, put out their post-spring top 25 and see what you think about that to round out this one here on this special crossover. So if you haven't already, hit that subscribe, leave some comments, what you're thinking, all that good stuff, because we are bringing you the action. All right, Nick, 16-team playoff, which is inevitable to happen. I mean, before we really dive into it, you have the 12 teams last year. Big 12 only got one school in, Arizona State. I think you can make the argument that there should have been two at the very least. And I think although Iowa State made the Big 12 championship, I would lean that BYU was the one that was snubbed because of the SMU defeat or victory, if you will. But either way, I think that the Big 12 should have had two teams in. With this new 16-team format, there would be a guaranteed two teams from the Big 12 auto bids. ACC would also read two, but the SEC and the Big 10 would get four. Do you think that's fair? Do you think that's rigged? Or do you think that makes a lot of sense in this Power 4/Power 2 kind of rule they're bringing in now?
Yeah, when you say rigged, immediately your eyes go up, you kind of sit back and you, whoa, that's a pretty bold accusation there. Then you remember the Big 10 and the SEC are the ones that are planning this whole thing. They're the ones making these rules. So when we look at they're doubling the amount of teams that each conference would get it, like maybe rigged is the word to use there. Now, I have no problem with, I've kind of thrown this out before. What if we go 3-3-3-3 or 2-2-2-2? If it's even, that's fine. I really don't have too much of a gripe with that, especially if you're pushing to 16. But when it's uneven like this, and this is the way I look at it. You can't guarantee me that there are going to be four national championship caliber or even playoff caliber teams from the SEC or the Big 10, and that there are going to be two or one of the same caliber from the Big 10 or Big 12, or the ACC. Wow. So what I'm trying to get at here, I hate it, because you could have a year where the Big 12 has 3 or 4 or 5 schools and the Big 10 only has 1 or 2. And now there's a huge disparity where there are playoff teams that are left out and there are not very good playoff teams in, literally just because of auto bids. And with the structure that's being laid out, doesn't really look like there are going to be very many at-large positions. Now, I don't need to go into this rabbit hole. I could talk about this all day long, and I have, but that is my biggest takeaway here. If you're going to do auto bids, fine, but make them even across the board, because then it's just reducing the odds of not good teams getting in over teams that are actually good from a different conference.
I think the best quote I saw was actually from an ACC coach, University of Miami, or Miami U, the U, if you will, Mario Cristobal. And he said, with these new automatic bids, it's like granting bids. It's like granting spots. And in college football, we've never been about granting anything. It's about earning things.
Earned.
And with this automatic bid process, you're giving spots away. You're taking away the beginning of the season. You're only worrying about just a certain amount of games, especially if you have 4 SEC schools, 4 Big Ten schools. I'm with you 100%. This brings back the whole conversation about last year, because if we had these automatic bids process, we would still be going back to Alabama or BYU, teams that didn't make the process, right? Well, what teams would have made that? Would Alabama would have made it? Would they be one of the 4? BYU probably would in the second Big 12. And or you can go 2 years ago with the Florida State situation, right? So lots of things here to me that's super confusing, and I'm not for it either. I don't like auto bids, even if it guarantees 2 Big 12 schools in. I'm not for it. I personally think heading into the new year, this new playoff where it's going to be 12 teams again this year in 2025, might be the last time we have 12 teams. I still think the Big 12 will get 2 teams in, because I think that the conference is so good this year. There are going to be 2 teams where they cannot deny. I really do think that. And I think that there's a couple schedules that line up that way. And I think we're going to have at least 2 teams in the conference that at the second place team will be 10-2. Like could have a 12-0 team, could have an 11-1 team leading the way. And I think that second place team will be 10-2. And I don't think you can leave them out. That's just where I sit going into the season.
I think that would be great for the conference. And another quote that I saw, just to throw this at you after you mentioned Mario Cristobal, Rhett Lashley had said something along the lines of, look at the NCAA tournament, 5, 6, 7 years ago, how many SEC teams were getting in then, and then how many SEC teams then, if you were to base the play or the tournament off of those years, how many teams would have been left out from the SEC this year? So it's very hard to kind of build something based off the past for the future, just because of the way that sports work. And that, that's kind of your argument against the auto bids. Like, and I guess I'm for auto bids to an extent. Like, it has to be even for me if there's going to be any at all. I also agree with the earned, not given sentiment, but I wanted to throw that one out there. I thought that was at least in the recent, 10 years, even less, a very good example of like, this doesn't really work. So why are we doing this? Oh, because it benefits you. Okay. That makes sense.
I got 3 top 25 post-spring top 25s that have been posted from some people that we follow on 3, like Andy Staples, Avery Wasserman, Joel Klatt from Fox Sports. Joel Klatt has Kansas State at 16, Iowa State at 17, right there, 16, 17. Avery Wasserman has them at Kansas State at 23. Iowa State, nowhere to be found. But Andy Staples has Iowa State at 23, but Kansas State nowhere to be found. So here's my thought process here. Obviously, we both like Joe Klatt's better, has both of them up at a little higher, and both on the board. How much stock are you putting into these post-spring top 25s?
Personally, very little. Not none, because I like the ones where we're ranked pretty high, but not very much at all, just because there are so many injuries that are coming back from Iowa State. And I mentioned the tight end room already, and we'll talk about this in the next coming days, but the linebacker room is going to be enormous. And so the way that these guys go about these rankings, they are ranking so many teams. They just don't have the time to dive into who was injured, are they back, at what level, what were their stats prior, what is the coaches that they're working with, what's their pedigree in that position group. Like, they just don't have time for that. They're looking at what happened last year, who'd they lose, who'd they gain, and what kind of situation are they in currently, sort of. Like, they just kind of glance at it, in my opinion. So I don't think that they're diving in to these teams the way that we do every single day here at the Locked On Network. Like, we know what's kind of up. And so I'm just kind of like, all right, it's cool that we got Iowa State relatively high, but we all know by week 7, Iowa State's probably going to be in the top 10, and then they'll all be like, oh, who could have seen this coming? Well, me. I saw that coming.
Less than 100 days till you and I take a battle, not you and I exactly, but in Dublin, Ireland. We'll have our Guinnesses ready to go. But until then, you and I are actually going to meet up again tomorrow and possibly on Wednesday as well, breaking down a little bit more with Iowa State and Kansas State, kind of getting a feel for both our teams, what happened post-winter, post-spring, and making sure everybody else on both our networks, both our channels are aware, because Farmageddon is one of the best rivalries in all of college sports, especially in the Big 12. Sorry, BYU and Utah with the new holy war that came to the conference. Farmageddon still has it, baby. They still got it. And I will stand up on this one. I've always said it. I think Farmageddon's better than Kansas State, because it's not a rivalry if Kansas State just keeps winning over and over again. But Nick, where can everyone find you? What's going on? Obviously, we talked about what's going to happen in the near future, but where can everyone find Locked On Cyclones?
Locked On Cyclones on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast every day, and at Nick_Marv is my personal Twitter. If you ever have any opinions, send them over. I'll at least read them. Can't promise I'll get back to you.
Love that. And Locked On K-State at Twitter X, and you can find Locked On Kansas State anywhere you listen to your podcast. This has been a special Locked On College crossover. You can see more tomorrow on both our channels as we dig into, I think we're going to do Iowa State. We're going to dig into the Cyclones tomorrow. We're going to talk offense, defense. We're going to dig into a deep dive of that team and why Kansas State will take care of them in Dublin. Please like the videos. Please subscribe. And we'll see you back here next time.